Kia ora and welcome to another episode of Both Sides Now. Today we are super excited to be joined by ACT MP Laura McClure. Laura is a mum of two, has previously worked as a pharmacy technician and in fire safety. In 2023, during an election, she ran in the seat of Banks Peninsula and then entered Parliament in 2023 on the ACT Party's list. You may have seen Laura's infamous video of her holding up an AI nude deepfake of herself in the House. So Laura, thank you so much for being here today and welcome to the podcast.
Kia ora, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
So we thought we'd start from, the beginning of your political career. You have said that you've described your entry into politics as a bit spontaneous.
Yeah.
So what drove you to be a politician?
Yeah, look, I always say that I'm a bit of an accidental politician because it was definitely not my goal to land in Parliament. If you had asked me 10 years ago, would you be a member of Parliament? I definitely would have laughed. That was not my career trajectory at all. But during COVID, I got far more interested in politics. I also got far more invested in my kids' education and seeing the kind of work that they were bringing home, which got me more and more concerned, not to mention the costs that we were racking up in the debt and how that would impact actually my kids buying a home in the future. So I got more politically motivated, I guess, and ACT's policies were already aligning for me, just being like a small business owner and a parent with kids in education, and ACT was really offering some awesome things with like the likes of charter schools and some great policy there. So yeah, got more involved with ACT, and what was a little bit of like, I'll help you out with some things, turned into, will you stand for election? I was like, yeah. And then they ranked me high enough to be like land in Parliament. It was really one of those moments where I did actually not expect that. Some people are expecting things to happen, or maybe they expected to actually be on the list and they weren't at certain levels. But yeah, for me, I thought like I'm just helping these guys out. I want ACT to do well this election, and yeah, that actually landed me in a position to get elected. And while it was a surprise and I didn't think it was where I was going to be, I'm awfully privileged to have the opportunity to do it, and gives me the opportunity to do some really good stuff.
And has it been what you expected it to be, or is it nothing at all like you thought it would be?
Because I had no expectations, I didn't think I'd be there. So it's one of those, like, it's kind of weird. Like I had zero expectations, which I think is quite good, because then you're not like, you're not either way, what would you say, let down or excited by it. I think the one thing that I was surprised by is that everything is so much slower. Like, we know the bureaucracy is slow, and we know it takes a long time to get some things done, but it is infinitely longer than I could picture, which is a real problem when you've got a country like New Zealand that's been in, an economic downturn, and cost of living is just stagnating, and people can't, get ahead, and that's a real challenge when Parliament's so slow and takes a long time. Like, the decisions we're making today won't actually have an effect for a little bit longer, which is, a political risk, I'd say.
As someone who you've come in with fresh eyes because you didn't anticipate being a politician, have you seen anything you're like, we could definitely do this to speed up the process, or do you think it kind of
100%,
things need to take their time?
100%. Like, the things that could actually speed up are the things that we have political consensus on, the things that we agree on. We shouldn't necessarily be leaving those in a members' bill biscuit tin. There is mechanisms that we can use, which we can pull things out by actually supporting and agreeing, and focusing on getting that stuff done in the background on the members' days, and things that we actually really agree on, rather than like political things that we kind of, we're going to vote down anyway or might not go anywhere and waste House time. That would be really cool to see. And I think the small parties particularly are more keen to have that happen. They seem to be more collaborative, because the legacy parties have been there such a long time. They're like, that's just not how we do it. So there is that. And there's also the fact that our democracy is quite like immature. We don't have an upper house or and a lower house. So I think there is room in the future for bills that are kind of like regulatory changes, kind of business as usual, to go through as another parliament like that's sitting at the same time. So some of the MPs work on that, and some work on the more contentious stuff. That could speed things up quite significantly, which I think would be really useful, definitely to the benefit of the country, no matter which government of the day was in.
Do you think voters would be surprised by how much parties agree on stuff behind the scenes? Is it because there's a lot of legislation that goes to the House that we would need to hear about? Is there quite a lot that's actually agreed?
I think there's definitely a lot more consensus than people realise. I'll give you an example, actually. Like, Nicole McKee put the firearms reforms through. It went through its third reading this week. That is actually supported by across Parliament, which is really interesting, right, given how much political heat there was on firearms. But what it actually did, and what Nicole did, was work really well with the other parties about the issues and concerns they had to make sure that the piece of legislation she was going to have going through was going to be enduring, and it was actually doing what she said it would do, i.e. Close the loopholes to make firearms safer in New Zealand, make sure that gang members aren't basically having these firearms unchecked, giving police powers to be able to actually go in and seize them and things like that, and then also not punishing law-abiding citizens that use firearms for leisure, for work and things like that. So I think that's a good example of collaboration where it works, and you won't hear about that in the media unless there's that kind of clash in decisions. That's just one example, but honestly, there is quite a bit of legislation that does go through that we do actually agree on. The areas that we often don't are things like employment law, taxes, the more political stuff, education sometimes, all of those kind of things that political footballs. But yeah, a lot more consensus than people realise.
You say that some of the processes when it comes to lawmaking are really slow, but this government has seen the use of urgency be some of the greatest uses of urgency in the past 50 or so years. Do you think that's helped or hindered sort of the government's trajectory and towards achieving what it wants to achieve?
Yeah, I think a part of the reason urgency has been used so much is because of that business as usual work not getting done or getting through in time. And I think that is where, like I said before, if we had not necessarily upper house and a lower house, but potentially two chambers operating, that we would see less urgency because we'd be getting the business as usual going through, and then the more contentious bills would have the time to go through to select committees and have proper hearings. So yeah, I'm actually more of a fan of making sure at least there's proper scrutiny. I think urgency should only really be used when it's genuinely urgent, because the country requires some, drastic change, or there's a loophole in some of our systems where, harm could occur, or we've got a budget where we need to make the changes to levies and fees and taxes and stuff like that. That's justifiable, I think, and people can understand that. But when we have other bills that seem to be business as usual put through under urgency, that is purely because we are literally running out of time. And I guess the other thing to that is we only have 3-year terms in New Zealand.
That was going to be a follow-up question.
Yeah.
I think there is also a little bit of consensus across the House. At least it was brought up probably in the last election, maybe the one before that. There could maybe be some discussions about moving to a 4-year term. Would that be something you'd be interested in?
Yeah, so definitely. Actually, ACT brought a bill to Parliament this term around 4-year term. It's really ironic because the parties, we want to make sure everyone's got consensus on how it's going to work before it goes to referendum, right? And we've actually run out of time. So it's kind of ironic that we've run out of that time. But the way that would work, or the proposal is, you're giving a government an extra year, but in order to do that, select committees need to be fully ran by the opposition, or giving opposition more scrutiny power and certain mechanisms, which I think is quite a good trade-off, because at the moment, select committees are balanced where the government usually has one extra member, which means voting on certain things is heavily biased. And I do see changes happening in select committee, which are really good, but I also think it would be more fair, and it would be the benefit to the benefit of New Zealanders if the select committee was controlled by opposition, or at least even 50-50 down the middle. So that way it would be a better, fairer representation of what actually the committee heard and what the will of the people is. Ministers could still ignore a select committee report, of course, but that would just be a lot harder to do that. And so that is pretty ironic that it's not coming to referendum this time. But I would expect at the next election it will be there as a referendum on the ballot box. Yeah.
So interesting as well, your calls or discussion about a bicameral system, because we used to have a bicameral system.
I know.
I think it got disestablished around 1950 or something like that. Do you think New Zealand is too small to have a bicameral system?
Look, I think there's pros and cons to it, but I think the world has moved on quite a bit. There's other parliaments that are operating with more new sophisticated systems. I just went and saw the Welsh Senate, which they have definitely very modern processes in the way that they do. They're still Westminster style, but the way that they get things done. And I think there's things that we can learn from other parliaments that are similar to speed things up for the benefit of New Zealand, but also making sure we've got all those checks and balances in place and the process is still still solid. But yeah, it's interesting that we went from one of those systems to what we've got now. But yeah, look, there'll be arguments either side. Some people will love it. It's a little bit like the MMP argument, right? I actually am not a fan of MMP, but I'm only in my position because of MMP. But everyone's got a personal opinion on
What would your
all of this.
alternative to MMP be?
Oh, look, I think first past the post was actually pretty good. And I also think that if you are elected, you're elected by your people in your area and where you live and where you work and all of those kind of things. That's where you should represent. But I do agree that different ideas need to happen, and when we have two main parties, everyone tends to just vote the way they've always voted, the way their parents have voted, for example. The chance of a smaller party ever getting into parliament becomes less and less. So at the same time, I'm a fan of having more voices in parliament. So I think that is a good thing. Ultimately, we land in better positions and better policies when you've got different opinions testing things.
On the topic of different opinions, you grew up in a household where your mum was a staunch Labour Party supporter and your dad was a National Party supporter.
Yeah.
How did that sort of influence your sort of views on the political system and your political values growing up in quite obviously, I guess, a lot of political debates in your house?
Yeah, my parents have always been quite political, like as far as discussing who they're going to vote for and, why they want to vote for a certain party. And growing up, it was quite interesting, like watching that dynamic. But I think what it taught me is that a lot of your upbringing and where you've come from and who you are shapes your politics.
100%.
And like mum grew up in a state house with a single parent. Her father was an alcoholic. Her mother managed to escape that once social housing became available. She still had to work 3 jobs though, because they didn't have solo parent benefits. So she worked really hard raising kids, but she was given that opportunity to be able to get away from him because of the social housing. So mum sort of grew up with the whole, we need there is times where the state can step in and can help and all of those kind of things. And dad grew up on a dairy farm in the UK, had parents that came through World War II, had their kids quite late in life, in their 40s, were very successful farmers, really, really honestly quite entrepreneurial because they had all kinds of other things like battery chickens and things like that at the time, which were unusual. And he came from that different kind of life, I think. It was interesting. But I think for me, it gave me the opportunity to form my own political opinions because I could see both sides of their thinking. And it actually got me interested to look at the policies, which a lot of people don't do. A lot of people just look at one thing they see or a person that they see that they like or they dislike, who their friends are into, who their parents vote for and stuff, and they just go with that. And I think for me, it made me actually look outside of what my parents were looking at for starters, and also to vote for the policies that I thought were best for myself and for the country.
And so then obviously you've landed with ACT, but I guess ACT is very much a party of much less government intervention.
Yeah.
But your mum grew up in a situation where I guess she needed help. How do you sort of reconcile? Do you sort of see that there is still a place for the state and the state to help in those situations, like with the situation your mum grew up in?
Yeah, look, ACT it's no secret that we're a fan of a smaller government and a government that has less place within people's lives. But yeah, I do believe in a safety net. I do believe in there being a system in which, those that really need it get the help that they need. And I feel like, if we are paying tax and there's an element of that is stuff that we can all agree on should be happening. And I think that is, should never really change. And I think New Zealand should be quite proud of having that safety net. But where we're heading to now is we're heading to a welfare dependency state. When the incentives are not right and the incentives to work are not there the same way that they are to say on a benefit. So I think it's about getting the settings right, but ultimately I do believe that there should be some kind of backup. And you know what? That doesn't even need to be delivered directly by government. It could be delivered by community. We could be devolving that down to communities to help and deliver as well, which is also another ACT philosophy. It's the devolution of stuff into community. For them to deliver better than the government itself. So think of community housing providers, for example.
And iwi also do a lot of that work as well.
Iwi do a lot of incredible work in that. And I think that shows a community that has a problem and they have a solution, and we should be 100% targeting that rather than the government dictating how to do it. Yeah.
Do you think it's the right approach, though, to make further restrictions when it comes to accessing welfare, especially in a time where cost of living is absolutely top of mind for everybody and lots of people are really struggling. You know, we've got child poverty statistics through the roof at the moment. And say like changes that the government's intending to bring in about 18 and 19-year-olds being supported by their families, by their parents, rather than being on a job seeker benefit. Do you think that's going to help or hinder people in their reliance on welfare?
Yeah, look, I think a couple of things. I think if you've been relying on welfare for a certain amount of time, it becomes even harder and harder to get a job. Like we know statistically, if you are 18 and you are on a benefit and you're on it for more than 6 months, you can be on it for up to, I think it's like 15 to 20 years. It's insane. So we have to be able to get people off benefits earlier. If you don't have like a high income at the same time, you've got low income, it's definitely hard to get yourself work ready, to get the clothes you need, to be able to actually access and get to interviews and things like that too. So I think it's about a balance and it's about like putting in the right supports. I do believe if you're at home, you're living at home with your parents, there should be some kind of income testing there, because all students have that with our student loan. You know, I mean, not a student loan, but a student benefit, for example, that is tested on your parents' income or earnings. So why is it fair that other 18 to 19-year-olds that aren't in university or aren't, you know, in part-time work or something are able to access that themselves as well? It just seems really unfair. And you've got to remember, if they are in education, there is other definitely supported living benefits and payments that are still there. If you've got a disability, there is still definitely benefits there as well. It's just really for those that are on job seeker, where their parents are earning, you know, a higher wage. And yeah, like I just think that, again, that's fair. It's about who really needs this money. And I would say, you know, a solo parent with 4 kids is probably more in need of money than someone who's able to live at home and their parents are working. So yeah, it's just, I think it's, yeah, it is, but don't get me wrong, I 100% agree, economically it's really tough. And I think we should be, at the same time, if we are saying no to benefits or cutting certain areas, we should be doing other things to be able to get people into work as well and assist them to get off that benefit, because that's that long-term goal, getting them into work.
Yeah. You have said in the past that you've voted for almost every political party except the Greens.
Yeah, and New Zealand First.
And New Zealand First. Oh, yeah. Get that in there. Firstly, how did you sort of land on ACT? I guess you sort of spoke about it before, in that you're a small business owner and stuff.
Yeah.
But secondly, why not the Greens? Or NZ First, we'll put them to the side.
Oh, look, I think, NZ First are just like, they have got, I mean, Winston Peters has got an astute political radar. He likes to win, and he will change his policy or his viewpoint on almost anything to whatever the will he thinks of the people are of the day. And that's almost like a skill in itself. But I don't know what they stand for ultimately. The things I think they stand for definitely don't align with my values. But I think the Greens, particularly their tax policies and this idea that we have finite resources, the pie is fixed and we must redistribute the pie, is zero-sum thinking. It's not positive and reinforcing thinking. The fact that we actually can grow that pie, we can lift the tide together, is the type of thinking that I like to adhere to, and I think it's true of myself, and I think it's true of others. And so it's that having that personal responsibility, having that like bigger vision that we all can actually do better, rather than taxing those who do well, I think it's the kind of the ideology just does not align. So that's where Greens are over here. The old Greens, some of their environment policies, I do agree with, because like New Zealand's beautiful, it's an amazing country, and we want to make sure that we look after our environment. So there is that as well. But definitely their economic policy is not so good. And I think the shift from like a Labour to an ACT, I voted for Labour because I wanted an interest-free student loan because I was a student. And totally. And look,
you and a lot of people
I stand by that, because you know what, like right now I think, oh my gosh, it'd be great if we had interest on student loans, because it would pay off a lot of government debt. We could do a lot of things with that money. But at the same time, when you're a student and you're like staring down a barrel of like, you know, all this kind of study, and I couldn't get any help from my mum and dad because of their wage, but I wasn't living at home. I had all these bills. An interest-free student loan was really something that was quite appealing, so I voted for Labour based on that. I sort of still stand by that because at least I voted for something that I thought was going to be good for students and good for myself. Whether I think in hindsight if that's actually the right thing or the right setting or not, I don't know. But it was right for me. And so that's why I say to anybody when they are looking at who to vote for, I'm like, as long as you're voting for policies that you actually believe are good for yourself and good for the country, like I don't really care who you vote for. Just take that into account when you're doing it. And yeah, how did I land with ACT? Like over time, when I grew up, I started voting more towards with National because they were business focused. I was also getting into business myself and I saw the opportunities there. And I also saw when we had like a Labour government, the rules and the regulations that they were putting upon businesses, particularly small business, how difficult it was to do things. And I think myself working in health and safety and fire safety and basically making money off regulation, I noticed the things that add value to a business and that are really, really good and keep people safe, and the things that we just tick the box and pay someone for. And that was a real worry because two reasons. One, businesses are paying for things that they just really don't need. And two, you create a safety culture where the things that are going to keep you safe at work become almost background noise to just ticking all of these things that we have to do. And I think it's really dangerous. It's kind of like, they call it orange fatigue or like road cone fatigue. It's where you see so much road cone, you now don't even see it as a warning. You're just like, just more road cones. So you don't actually notice the person on the side of the road that's actually down a manhole and you hit a road cone. Like it's that kind of mentality. So yeah, like ACT was really solid on these things. They really believe in like deregulation, making it easier to do business. They're definitely not completely anti-regulation, which a lot of people say. They're about sensible regulation, about making sure that we do the things that keep people safe and make sure that we obviously have businesses in a good space doing the things that they need to do to comply, but we're not going to go over the top, just keep hitting them with extra compliance costs and duplication all the time. So yeah, that's where I landed.
That's interesting. I have a question sort of lined up for when we get into the deepfakes.
Yeah.
But just sort of now while we're talking about it, when it comes to regulation, where's the sort of line when it comes to good regulation versus bad regulation? How much is too much, and why do we need a whole ministry set up for addressing it?
Look, I think it's the areas are like when you think about why we have to regulate something or why should we regulate something? Is it because there's, adverse outcomes to people? Is it because there's like a natural monopoly in some area and we need to deal with that? Like there is really only a few areas that we should be really regulating in. Like the rest of the market can often solve on its own without government intervention. Where the line for me is usually around, things that are actually tangible and are going to make a real difference, whether it's in like safety, usually in the safety aspect, whether it's like health and safety, whether it's, taking care of young women online, all these kind of things, right? Like I think there is clear indicators or let's think of some of the alcohol things or gambling. We know where there is harm occurring and we know what we actually need to do and where we should regulate. So I think those are really obvious areas. I think there is definitely areas where we have gone out and we have regulated to try and solve problems and we've created so many extra problems. And I think the reason we need a ministry is to go through old regulation and actually have a look at it and see if it's actually adding value. Is this actually effective? Is it doing anything? Or is it just costing someone an awful lot of money and having no actual benefit or outcome? And all of that adds to that cost of living picture. And I think right now, without a government spending money, the best thing we can do is look through things that are costing people money and how can we actually make it cheaper for people in that sense. And so I think Ministry of Regulation is like ultimately there to look through all the old regulations and find the stupid ones and hopefully cut some red tape and get them out of the way.
While we're on the topic of, talking about ACT and ACT's policies, you've also previously said that you don't always agree with ACT's policies in the past. But most of them are common sense. What are some examples of policies that you potentially disagreed with?
Yeah, look, I think back, like if I look back to when I started voting, I would have looked at ACT and been like, oh my gosh, they're so strong on things like privatise everything. And that used to be like quite a hard line with like ACT, privatise ACC or something like that. And while we're still a fan of getting the private market to solve a lot of our problems for us and working with the private market. I think where ACT has landed policy-wise now is good. It's talking about the public-private partnership model where, you know, the government might procure services from a private provider or an NGO or an community organisation, iwi, for example, but still have oversight and accountability. I think that's a really good model, and it's something that I think a lot of us is learning from what has happened when we privatised too much in some areas, and probably like the 80s, for example, or 70s, 80s, and I think it's a really good balance. So, you know, there'll be people with an ACT that are like, nah, privatise everything, probably my boss. But I think the reality is that's not the world we live in, and that's not what people want to see. And you know, like I think where we're landing now with our policies around privatisation is working in partnership with the government, and I think that's a really good place to be.
It's interesting speaking, I guess, sort of back to those sort of neoliberal ideas back in the 80s in particular. You've just been to the UK, and on your trip to the UK, you saw the bronze statue of Margaret Thatcher at Westminster, and you noted that she was one of your political heroes.
Yeah.
What do you see as Thatcher's strengths?
Yeah, like a couple of things. Like, not everything Thatcher did I agree with, of course, but she was the first female prime minister, and she came in the back of a time where England was doing really badly. You know, they were about to get an IMF bailout. It was extremely tough economic times, and really tough decisions had to be made. Think of like Ruth Richardson. Like we've had these times where people, Rogernomics, we've had these times where people have had to make some really unpopular financial decisions that have actually then set us up for like the next 2 or 3 decades of actually really good prosperity and doing really well. So for that, I really think, being a woman in politics is hard enough. Being like having to make tough and ruthless decisions is also really hard. And I think for that, she actually saved Britain a lot of, honestly, despair. And I know that she's controversial over there. Yeah. And actually the post, I was like, whoa, okay, I didn't realise this would be so heated, so divided. And like, you know, even my brother who's been living over there texting, he's like, Margaret Thatcher, like what's going on here? So yeah, there are some policies in some areas that I think if she even had hindsight of, she probably wouldn't have done. Yeah. But I think for the time and the place, like that was really courageous to do those things. And it set Britain up in a really good space. For the rest of, you know, for the 90s, for the early 2000s, they wouldn't have been the place it was without some of those decisions that were made.
Do you think that the sort of our dabble in New Zealand into neoliberalism sort of in 1984 around then also set us up for that sort of prosperity? Because my personal opinion is that, and I guess you saw it with the United States with Ronald Reagan and in the UK with Thatcher, is that while there was that economic up, it also created a lot of social inequity. And I think that is part of, in fact, perhaps the whole reason why she is such a controversial and divisive figure.
Yeah, look, it could be. I think you have to think about what would have been like socially to have lived in basically post-Cold War time permanently. Like that would have ended up being a massive social upheaval. There would have been a lot of people that were living in poverty, and it could have been even a lot tougher and harder than it ended up being. So I get that. You know, it appears like there was, you know, some people got richer and some people got poorer, all of these kind of things that it is kind of like that thinking around it. But what if everybody was just poorer? What if the countries didn't do well at all and there was no economic opportunity? And I have to look, and like one of the really interesting areas is something like farming and agriculture and the tough time that it had in that era. And if you look at our farmers now, we don't have subsidies in farming in New Zealand, and dairy have just had a boom of a season. We're like highly efficient. We're like the most efficient farmers on the planet. Like we're incredibly environmentally friendly when it comes to farming. Like we are doing it so well compared to anywhere else. And that is partially because we had to innovate and move and do things differently. And I think there's arguments either way to that, but I often think like it's really good. I mean, it's really easy to look back on something and say, oh, it's because of that. This is why we created an inequality. But we don't look at what actually would have been if the status quo actually stayed like that, you know? things would have been far worse, in my opinion.
Do you think we're existing in a time now where potentially we need to make some tough, unpopular decisions? Because I guess, obviously, we're in our mid-20s, but it feels like the world as we've known it for the last 80 years is no longer with with what's going on internationally. And it feels like New Zealand's in this sort of endless spiral of cost of living. Like since COVID, nothing's, it's been really tough. Do you think we need to make some hard decisions?
I think like every Western democracy is at a kind of like a crux of some sort, whether it's because they've got like geopolitical like tensions, actual literal wars on their like doorsteps. If we think of the UK, Ukraine is about 2.5 hour plane ride, a whole day of travel, and you'd be at the front line. Like that is super serious. That is a democracy that has been invaded, and people are dying, so it's really serious. And if you look at like conflicts in the Middle East and stuff that is happening there, we look at the rise of China in our own backyard, and the pressures that they're putting on the likes of Taiwan with the Taiwan Strait, and what could escalate all of those things, they feel like so big, and I think they're going to be so much more important to our economy than we could ever imagine. And it feels like nobody's really looking at that and planning for that, which really does actually worry me, especially after traveling around and seeing what's happening. I think we're going to be put in positions where we're going to have to make really tough decisions. Economically, right now, I think we are like seeing that we have to make tough decisions. Like this is why this government is not being, I think, as popular as it could have been, because we've had to make decisions around spending money and tightening the belt, just as every other household has had to do as well. Otherwise, inflation would have just kept creeping up, mortgage rates would have kept creeping up, and it just would have been like there's no lever we could have pushed either which way, which would have actually resolved any of these situations. So yeah, look, I think we are probably at one of those turning points, and it's whether we like it or not. And some of the things that are going to happen may be out of our control in New Zealand, but what we can do is we can insulate ourselves as much as we can from what could be coming globally, and do our best to make sure we're positioned to like do well for New Zealand.
You did mention there China and Taiwan.
I'm hoping you bring that up.
Bring up the little encounter with China recently on your visit to Taiwan.
Yeah.
Do you have any sort of comments on what's happened there and how that's played out with being banned from China? I think it's for a year.
Yeah, for a year, China, Hong Kong, and Macau, I think it is. Look, I was really like surprised and like disappointed and quite shocked by it, because like the relationship with China and New Zealand is quite good that I'm aware of. They're our biggest trading partner. We see them as a friend to New Zealand. I was really surprised because these trips happen every year. Former Prime Minister John Key went on one before he became Prime Minister. Lots of MPs go on it. It's cross-party. It's really about our trade and our cultural ties with Taiwan. It's completely in line with our One China policy, which we've had for like 50 odd years. Nothing's changing there on our policy front. And so, yeah, look, I was really disappointed that they felt like they needed to make this statement. And at the same time, I think it's not just disappointing, it's really concerning, because is it a threat to members of parliament around travelling to Taiwan or to another democracy? Is it to deter? I 100% think it is. And is it a sign of more to come? And that is really something that I think we should all be worried about. And I'm really proud that myself and Duncan Webb from Labour stood up and actually said, you know what, like New Zealand is sovereign, like members of parliament are elected by the people here, we make decisions about where we go and what we do and who we engage with. It's a huge diaspora community of Taiwanese in New Zealand. So they are a community, they're people that we represent, Māori whakapapa back to one of the little iwis in Taiwan. So there's heaps of like cultural connection there, and they're our 8th biggest export market as well. They like eat more kiwi fruit per capita than anywhere, anywhere on the planet. So like these are all great things, and they are all good reasons why a member of parliament would be travelling to Taiwan, and I really do hope that other members of parliament still go there and don't be deterred by it, because it is part of our free democracy here in New Zealand, and it's how we operate.
Has there been much kickback since that happened? Since you got that ban and you sort of had other contact with other people, like people from the Chinese government or without breaking national security here, but or from other countries, any support or anything like that?
I would say no. I haven't heard anything else from China or or the likes, but I've definitely had a lot of support from other like-minded countries, particularly Australia. Like their Foreign Minister Penny Wong came out right away and said, hey, like this is unacceptable. We've got a trip of Australian MPs going next month. Actually, they go in August, so that'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what happens there. But yeah, she was like, no, like this is just not okay. Like we don't do this to New Zealand. And that just rippled out amongst like all the Pacific, the UK and the likes as well got on board and said, you know, this isn't okay. And they wanted to interview me about it. Just make it very apparent to their population that this was happening as well to New Zealand. So, look, I think if anything, you know, because New Zealand was the first country to have a free trade agreement with China, it gave China the opportunity to get into those markets that were our friends. And I think when we see this kind of threatening behaviour happen to someone like New Zealand, everybody stops and looks at that. So I think that is something, you know, they might be sending us a warning shot. Well, I would challenge that back, to be honest. Yeah.
Shall we turn now to AI deepfakes?
Sure.
Okay, wicked.
Let's go.
How did you come to champion this issue, AI deepfakes?
Yeah, like, so as ex-education spokesperson and as a parent of like pre-teens, one's actually a teen now, but of that age group, and also a mental health spokesperson, I kept hearing from whether it was parents, teachers and principals, even some students, about the rise in using like AI to deepfake each other. And then it became more and more apparent that some of the stuff was getting quite disturbing and quite harmful. And it was when a friend told me about a girl at a school here in Auckland that was deepfaked into porn, like really degrading, horrific stuff. And she found herself like super upset by this. She stopped going to school. When they did get her back into school, she actually attempted suicide at school, which is like really sad, because this wasn't just like deep faking someone or like cutting their head off and putting it onto like Photoshop sort of version, and clearly not them. It was so realistic that only the perpetrator who did this to her and her knew that it was fake. So, you know, trying to get that past all your peers is just like super humiliating and embarrassing, and the toll was so huge on her. So, you know, I said to my friends, like, surely the police can do something about this. We've got the Harmful Digital Communications Act, like what's happening, what are the school doing? And it appeared that the school had tried to get some support or help from the police, but the police felt that you know, it's not illegal in New Zealand explicitly. We have the Harmful Digital Communications Act, but it doesn't talk about AI or synthetics or deep faking. So they were not convinced they would get a conviction on this, which meant that they just left it. And so the school then doesn't get like victim support or wraparound help. You don't, as a victim, you don't get like ACC to help you get any type of mental health help. And I thought, look, like this is clearly something that is increasing. I'd heard of a couple of other stories, and in Australia they had had quite a few incidents happening over there. So started researching it a bit more and looking into it, and I was really troubled to see how big of an issue this had become and how normalised it was becoming in schools. You know, I'd go to events and I'd ask like high school kids, like, how many of you have like been deep faked? And there would be like heaps putting their hand up. And I was just like, oh my gosh, you guys have like totally normalised this behaviour in some cases. And then in other cases, yeah, like it would be having such a detrimental effect. People had dropped out of school. So I was like, right, we need to fix this piece of legislation. Went to researching how to do it. We found that actually it's really simple change. It's just like updating some wording in our current legislation, in our Crimes Act and our Harmful Digital Communications Act. And so I drafted the bill, put the bill in the biscuit tin, and then came up with a comms plan to get that piece of legislation into law. And that's where I found myself deep faking myself. Yeah, that's where we went to next.
I guess on the fact that, you know, you did deepfake yourself, did you sort of view this as the necessary way, or sort of the kind of the extreme way to sort of get this out into the public and sort of make the point?
Pretty much, because as a government backbencher, you don't have a ministerial portfolio. You can write to a minister to highlight issues and you can hope that they'll do something about it. The only real way that you can make change is by putting a piece of legislation in a biscuit tin and hoping it gets drawn out, which is apparently like a 2 or 3% chance of it ever getting pulled out. So I sort of thought, this is like really serious. I'm hearing more and more about this happening. I'm really worried that like someone's going to kill themselves before a government turns around and says, oh, that should be illegal. So I talked to my comms team at the time about what we could do. And they said, like, we have the general debate, which happens on a Wednesday. That's where members of parliament can basically talk about anything. So we decided that we would deepfake myself. We thought about doing other members of parliament, considering it's not explicitly illegal, although they probably could have gone at me for defamation maybe under like other legal avenues. So we sort of thought this is actually maybe not a good idea. The safest option would be to do myself, and that in itself was like really scary because it didn't take me long to find like websites that could do it. I didn't even have to use an app. I didn't have to like use my email to sign up or pay for it or anything. There was just hundreds of sites where I could do this on. So we got the images. I made about 10 or so of them, and I found the one that was like the least revealing and the easiest to blur to be able to take into the house to just show the members of parliament of like what is happening. And to raise this issue. So yeah, look, I think that was an effective way of doing it, given the fact that as a backbencher you don't have a lot of a voice, and I really needed to get the voice of those victims that had come to me to tell me about the issue across the line. So yeah, a little bit dramatic, but I think it worked. So yeah, for that I'm not sorry.
See, I feel like we might have some political opinions that disagree.
Yeah.
But this is something I'm so with you on. I feel like that this matter is so shocking, that the effects of it are so shocking that it is worthy of that sort of shock factor in Parliament and to raise that attention. So I'm just really with you on this one. I think that was a really, really awesome way to bring attention to something that is really serious. Do you think New Zealand is still lagging behind when it comes to this sort of regulation of AI deepfakes or just AI in general?
Yeah, look, I think we are behind the ball in the fact that we hadn't even made it explicitly illegal to do this to somebody. So that was where I've started, right? That's where I've said, you know what, like the technology's there, it's going to be really hard to regulate, like genuinely. Even the website that I used to deepfake myself into porn didn't have any like basically was like an AI image generator of like people and bodies and stuff like that. It didn't have any like sexual content in the tagline, so I don't even know how you would find it, for example, to like try and ban that site. So the first thing I thought we should be doing is saying like that the behavior of doing it and using the technology first and foremost is actually so bad that it should be illegal. So that was like where we've started. And actually countries that have done this, we've seen like, for example, app stores turn around and say like notify apps are not allowed in this country because it's illegal to do that. So like all of these things that follow on without having to actually regulate and go down another stream, I think is really important to note as well with this, the standard it sets, right? And the other thing it does is it sends a signal to young people that this is so serious, you could actually get a conviction for this. Don't expect to see a bunch of like 16, 17-year-olds getting convicted of this kind of harm unless it was really prolific. But what I would expect to see is police actually being going into schools, talking to young people about how serious this is, and actually having the ability to do more about it if they need to. And I think that's really important. And we know with the likes of, say, sharing a nude somebody sent you, with revenge porn, that when we made that illegal in 2022, we initially saw like a spike increase in offending, and that would have been police prosecuting because they now can, and now it's dropped right off. Like people know not to share nudes that you've been sent. That has become like, it's quite offensive, and if they get sent something by someone, they're like, oh, you know, like they know not to share that on, like it's actually illegal. So I think if we can get the message right about this and we can actually change the culture around it as well, we will see, I hope to see, despite the technology being there, that people will know that this is a line in the sand here, this is gross, we're not going to do that, it's really harmful.
It's like, it's what's interesting is that you've picked up the issues around AI and deepfakes.
Yeah.
And there's obviously at the moment of the social media bill that's going before the House, which ACT aren't supporting, which is also seeking to try and deal with a lot of the harm we're dealing online by banning it from under 16-year-olds.
Yeah.
What's sort of your view around, you know, you're going to ban deepfake porn, which is harmful, but you're not going to ban social media, which is also seen to be quite harmful for young people?
Yeah, look, it's not that I don't think that harm's happening on social media. I do. I think that like the content that they're saying is harmful, and also the algorithms themselves. are deeply harmful. I think the issue is in how it works and how a ban actually is effective, because we've seen in the UK, for example, even just talking about a ban has like gotten people wild about like digital ID and where it goes. In Australia, like 60% within the first, I think, few weeks were back online in some shape or form. As a parent, I'm really concerned about where my kids would go. My kids don't have social media, which is good. That's also another thing. Parents should have a lot more, like, I believe it is a parental issue as well. But for the ones that are parents that have kids already on this, I get that they need a solution. But I think, like, yeah, those ones, if they went to another part of the internet that we couldn't see and we didn't know, that's an issue. Yeah. I think where we
both agree on that.
Yeah, and it is an issue. And so that's dangerous. So look, I think there are ways that we can work better with the social media companies. There may be some regulation in this space around, if you have young people on your platform, you have to clean that up. It has to have XYZ safeguards like in place. And even like having some kind of like rating on social media, like the way that they do for like for classified stuff like movies and games and all that, so parents actually know as well, like what a company does to get a rating and how they're going to adhere to that. So it gives you choice and options. I know my boss has sort of said, actually, why should we have smartphones at all for under 16s? That was an idea he threw out in a speech. There's a few practicality issues with that, yes. But I do get in essence, I get what he means. Like, is it easier to just say, actually, you can't have a device that has the ability to have these on it, but until you're old enough to actually be able to like drive the device, like use the device. There is some merit in that as well, right? So like I'm not completely adverse to that. It's definitely not an ACT policy yet. But the truth is something has to happen and we need to do something. And I think that is where everyone's got the alignment. It's just how we do it is the question. And if we're talking about, things like a digital ID, hand over to third parties where we don't know what's going to happen. We don't have great digital safety laws in New Zealand, privacy laws that protect us when we give our ID over to third parties, even right now. We've seen, data breaches and was in one of the My Health or something this year. Like in other countries, there'd be huge fines and repercussions for that and reporting mechanisms that they should have been doing if they're keeping your data. Like New Zealand needs to get that all in place before they look at doing other things too. So like we're just behind like all of this digital space. Yeah.
So I guess magic wand then, if you were going to like for your kids, what would you like to see? Is it more education, do you think, for young people, the harm as well?
Yeah, 100%. Like I think we've been really naive when it comes to education around the digital world, like growing up in a digital space, whether it's using things like social media, using the internet in general, now AI. I'm worried that we're going to have a generation of kids that, there's all these harmful things happening, but they've also not harnessed it for awesome things as well. So I think there's, an ability or an opportunity there to like actually teach our kids about these kind of issues and these harms that they might find, but also teach our kids how we can actually use potentially AI to our benefit and in a really good way. So I think we don't want to miss the boat on either of those, and we sort of have with the social media, because we've now got a generation that have grown up on it and are harmed by it. They're addicted to it. There's a lot of things that have happened with that, and I think that is really concerning. So we've got an opportunity now where we can correct that, and education is definitely one of the key spaces where it could make a massive difference.
Do you think your sort of millennial lens really assists you in that sort of line of work? I feel like as sort of like more Gen Z-esque, we grew up with social media in its infancy, especially sort of around like the early 2010s when it was really Snapchat and Facebook.
Yeah, totally.
Stuff. Do you think being sort of a younger politician, I guess, in Parliament has been a help?
I think possibly, yeah. I think like there is definitely a perceived reality in the reality, and that is generational.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing is that we've got to remember with social media, like we've just talked about all these harmful things, but it's where like people find community, like, young entrepreneurs sell their things online first, usually on Marketplace.
Love Facebook Marketplace.
Exactly. We love Facebook Marketplace. We're like, any of the marginalised communities, like that's where they find their people and their support, like our disability community, rainbow communities, stuff like that. So we don't want to like isolate them further by not having a space to go. So while there's all these horrible things on social media, you just have to look at my comment section on my page to see what it's like.
We're getting to that.
Oh gosh. There is behaviour that's pretty gross. There is also really cool stuff, and we don't want to lose that, and we don't want to take away from that either. And I think a lot of the older politicians forget that, and they're not actually listening to the voices of young people that actually are saying, hey, don't ban social media, because that is also where we get XYZ. Help us have tools to navigate it better, or give us some resources. And parents, same, give us resources to help. Actually, what can we do here? Yeah.
I found real community when I was about 12, 13 with One Direction on Twitter.
Did you?
I personally love that stuff. But I guess that's some of the good stuff.
Yeah.
Some of the bad stuff, and I think it's being spoken about a lot more now, those communities where young men are finding themselves in this so-called manosphere.
Yep.
What might we do with the manosphere?
Look, I think it's a societal thing though. I think it's the issue is not just the internet. The internet is because of the way that we are living, we're all online. It's where you find, you could potentially find a community, or where you find something that you associate with or recognise. I think while it is exponentially worse when it's online, I think it's actually in our homes, and it's in our parenting. It's the way that we're bringing up our kids. It's in our education system. It's how we're actually talking to our young men, our young boys, about being a boy. And I think we actually haven't done that very well in the last few years, and when I look at the type of behaviour that I'm seeing in the manosphere, I actually feel really sad, because I feel like there are boys that feel if they're feeling threatened by females, they are feeling really disengaged. That often don't have that kind of community around them. That's really sad. I just think we need safer spaces for boys to be boys, teach them how to be good men, make sure that they don't disrespect women. And that all comes down fundamentally back to parenting and education, and having spaces for them. Because I don't think we've kind of done this whole inclusivity stuff, but there is fundamental differences between boys and girls, and sometimes we need to let the boys be the boys and do their things over here. And if girls want to do that too, cool, that's all good. I'm all good with that as well. But it's just I guess, I think about rugby. My son played it, and he did ripper to start with, and ripper is all about running around ripping the tag off each other. And then the first year that they do tackle, they're all scared to tackle each other. They're all I don't want to do this. They actually genuinely are worried. Yet if we had said, you guys can tackle from straight off the bat, they'd be right in there. They'd be doing their thing. And so it's kind of we've conditioned them not to just be themselves and have that outlet, and then create that team and that environment that's actually a healthy space to be in. I think online will definitely isn't great, because it's somewhere that can actually fuel these things further. But also we can do more by having safe spaces out of that, and also teaching them well about being good to women and stuff like that as well.
Speaking of education, the last topic that we wanted to touch on was, you said in your maiden speech that you want to encourage diverse educational approaches and outcomes.
Yeah.
You've also been critical of schools spending too much time incorporating Te Reo into the curriculum. I guess, how do you sort of align those two views?
Yeah, look, I think there is 100% the need for more diverse education, whether it is more Te Ao Māori worldview version of school, charter schools. We've had a few new ones open actually that are ran by iwi, whether it's a charter school that is based on music, sports. I think we've got one with Phoenix up in Wellington. I think having diversity in education is really important. My issues with some of the Te Reo in the curriculum felt like it was just virtual signalling. It's adding in a few words here or there in the previous curriculum to kind of somewhat, I would say, appease what they were trying to deal with. And it doesn't feel very, it's not great for teaching a language to anybody. And it didn't feel like it was actually going to have any real impact. And ultimately, when it comes to learning a language, a lot of experts agree that we should be, instead of this hybrid language, throwing in the odd word here or there, they should be standalone subjects. So I'm all for having standalone Te Reo Māori. Like my son learns it. He goes to school on Wednesdays. He's the Māori leader at his school. He is right into it. He loves it. My daughter, on the other hand, she's like, I do a bit of kapahaga because I like to get an hour of school. Like I like to do this or that. She's not as into it, so she doesn't go to any of the additional classes and things like that. So I think it's more about, if we're going to do something, let's have it in its right place, have it as its standalone subject, make sure that we're doing it justice, and make sure we're doing it for the right reasons, and people have got the choice and the ability to do it. So that's more from an educational perspective. And it would be the same if it was any language. Like educational experts say that trying to put like a French word here or there, like within English, just doesn't work. It's easier for a kid to learn like one language in separation to another language as whole.
As somebody who's learned a second language, I can confirm immersion is probably the best way to learn a second language.
If you want to, yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Do you think if we take away some of those sort of bits and pieces that you consider virtue signalling, we need to bolster the kura kaupapa mahi and the work that goes in there and get those waiting lists down? Because I understand it, it's pretty hard to get a spot on those kura kaupapa.
Totally. Yeah, and I've got lots of friends and like who are choosing to send their kids or wanting to send their kids to kura kaupapa, and I think it's a great example of an educational choice for a parent that wants their kid to go to an immersion so that they can actually learn it properly, right? And I think that's also where charters help fill that gap too, because the state isn't coming to the party with creating more of these kura kaupapa, whereas iwi are saying, hey, actually, we can do this, we know how to do it, and we want to do it differently. So there is great opportunity there, and I think we will see more. And that is, again, it's about parents and community choice. Like if a community requires a different way of learning, or they need a different way of learning, like they should be allowed to offer that and have that as an opportunity. And I think as parents, we should have the choice to be able to do that in our system. Like not all of us have, money to spend to go elsewhere, and particularly into private education and things like that.
Do you think it's fair to say then that to achieve fair outcomes, we may need to treat people differently?
I don't think it's about treating them differently. I think it's about giving them different potential opportunities and choice to get to where they need to be. So I think I'm with that. So I always think that on face value, you should treat someone equally. And that is based on, who, not their background and their history and all of those kind of things, but actually who they are as a person and actually judging them on their merits and things like that. 100% agree that there are people that come from a disadvantaged start point, and there are people that learn differently, and our education system hasn't catered well to them, and that's exactly why charter schools was founded. It is the number one principle or reason why ACT brought charter schools forward, and that was because we could see that there are communities that need that additional support and additional help to get to where they need to be, and people are in different starting points. And being able to have an education system that recognises that and has a solution to that, I think is really amazing. I think it's about the opportunity piece there and the choice to be able to do it, and how do you help people get to that equal opportunity and choice part, and that sometimes is different.
Mm-hmm. Do you think the education system can actually in reality achieve those outcomes? It's everyone. I guess, it's meant to be a great equaliser. Do you think we actually get there with the education system in reality?
Look, I don't think we do at the moment. And this is where the argument between mainstream education just needs to be more adaptable, or it needs to flex more, or we need to put more money into mainstream to be able to do the things that, say, charters are doing, or, other Māori immersion schools, right? The argument against that is it's never going to ever fit within one system. It has to be an ecosystem of options, because even if you resourced mainstream school to be able to do all these things, or have separate units for for autism, for example, and with different learning aids and separate music, specialist music areas of schools and things like that, you've still got a large school of 2,000 odd plus people, where that's not going to work for some people at all. Just that environment is never going to be perfect no matter what, whereas charters offers that gap filler and that opportunity to do things quite differently. And so the sooner I think that we realise it's not an either or, it's a complementary, it's something that they can all operate in together nicely, I think that would be a real huge success for New Zealand, and a lot of other places have already done that. They don't even talk about, is the school a charter a school not, is it a charter or not? It's just the school's good, this school's not so great, or whatever it is, or my kid's going to go to this language immersion school, this French language school, for example, if you're somewhere in Europe, or a music school, and that's just the norm. But yeah, here in New Zealand, it's very postcode orientated, very one size fits all still, and there's definitely a pushback on a charter school model, particularly by the union. So yeah, I really challenge the thinking to look to how we can get to, like where you said, an equal starting point around opportunity with education. Where to go.
Awesome. Well,
Cool.
Laura, thank you so much for being with us today and speaking to us. This is
Thanks.
Party member Laura McClure. It has been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me. Thanks, guys.